For over a century, the sinking of the Titanic has been told as a cautionary tale of hubris. We accepted that the greatest ship ever built was doomed by reckless speed, missing the binoculars, and captains ignoring explicit ice warnings. But that explanation ignores a baffling physical contradiction. The night of April 14, 1912, was one of the clearest, calmest nights recorded. Veteran sailors described the ocean as a sea of glass, with starlight bright enough to read a watch. In those supposedly perfect conditions, experienced lookouts sitting high in the crow's nest scanned the horizon and saw absolutely nothing. A 200-foot-tall mountain of solid ice remained entirely hidden until they had only 37 seconds to turn the ship. Because no one could explain how trained men could miss something so massive on a completely clear night, society blamed the crew. We etched their negligence into history and decided that human error sent 1,500 people to their deaths. That official conclusion stood untested because investigators lacked the physical evidence needed to properly analyze the crash site for 110 years. Recently, researchers unearthed 1912 weather logs that mapped the specific atmospheric conditions over the North Atlantic that exact evening. At the same time, the 2022 Magellan project deployed 2 deep-sea robots to capture over 700,000 images, creating a complete digital twin of the wreckage down to the individual rivets. By combining these macro weather records with micro forensic scans, we finally have the tools to conduct a proper autopsy of the disaster. The new data replaces a century of assumption with physical, irrefutable proof. The meteorological logs revealed that Titanic was sailing directly out of the warm Gulf Stream and into the freezing Labrador Current. The area was also experiencing some of the highest barometric pressure ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere. This diagram shows a cross-section of the air and sea temperatures that night. The freezing water chilled the surface air to -2 degrees Celsius, while a distinct layer of warmer 6-degree air sat about 200 feet above it. This setup is called a temperature inversion. In a typical environment, light travels in a relatively straight line. But as we see here, when light passes through these drastically different temperature layers, the high pressure and sharp temperature contrast cause the light to bend downward, following the curvature of the Earth. When light bends this aggressively, it tricks the human eye. It projects a false horizon much higher in the sky than the actual waterline, leaving a gap between where the ocean truly ends and where it appears to end. Between the true horizon and the false one, the distorted light creates a thick band of visual haze. Any dark object caught in that zone, like an iceberg, loses all contrast. It blends perfectly into the distorted sky. This same atmospheric trickery worked in reverse for the nearby rescue ship, the Californian. The raised false horizon swallowed the bottom half of Titanic's massive hull, making it look like a tiny, insignificant vessel, and it dulled the glow of their distress rockets. Lookout Frederick Fleet did exactly what he was trained to do. He wasn't negligent. He was staring directly into an optical cloaking device that rendered a 200-foot wall of ice scientifically invisible until it breached the haze at close range. Even after discovering the wreck in 1985, researchers spent decades peering at it through tiny 6-inch submersible viewports. This limited perspective fueled the long-held belief that the ice carved a massive, continuous gash into the side of the hull. The Magellan scan finally exposes the actual damage. The iceberg didn't tear a gaping hole. It created a series of small puncture marks, each roughly the size of a sheet of paper, running along the starboard plates like a zipper. This graphic maps those tiny punctures against the ship's internal layout. Engineers designed the hull to stay afloat even if the first 4 watertight compartments flooded completely. The ice barely scraped the ship, but it grazed exactly 5 compartments. A margin of just 12 additional feet of scraped hull tipped the mathematical scales. Because that 5th compartment flooded, the ship's bow dipped low enough to pull the water over the tops of the internal walls, creating an unstoppable cascade. Forensic mapping now highlights the human evidence within the wreckage, starting with the maligned reputation of First Officer William Murdoch. Historical rumors labeled him a coward, but the physical site tells a different story. By cataloging every piece of debris, The mapping project located the lifeboat davits Murdoch was responsible for. Their mechanical positions in the wreckage prove he stayed at his station, manually deploying boats until the water swept him off the deck. Deeper inside the wreckage, the scans capture the final actions of the engineering team. 2 of the massive boilers exhibit severe concave damage. This specific warping happens only if the boilers were still highly pressurized when the freezing water hit them. It means the engineers voluntarily remained at their posts, feeding the fires to maintain the ship's electrical grid while the lower decks flooded. That electricity was their final gift to the passengers. It gave the Marconi operators the power they needed to broadcast the SOS distress calls on this wireless equipment. Without the engineers holding the line below, those signals would never have reached the Carpathia, and the 705 survivors would have been stranded in the dark. The physical evidence redefines the Titanic's legacy. This was a direct collision between invisible atmospheric physics and human engineering, a disaster met ultimately by profound, unsung sacrifice.